In today's video, I'm going to tell you the detailed story of Yumi, a Japanese factory worker captured during World War II who expected chains, brutality, and certain death. But what happened instead left her completely speechless. When American soldiers told her and 50 other female prisoners they could walk around the compound without guards watching their every move, she was convinced it was a trap. This shocking true story reveals how one seemingly impossible act of trust shattered everything these women believed about captivity, freedom, and the enemy they thought they knew. October 1945, the industrial city of Nagoya lay in devastation. Yumi crouched in the ruins of what had once been an aircraft parts factory, her hands still black with machine oil. She was 19 years old and had spent the last 2 years of the war operating a lathe that cut aluminum sheets for bomber fuselages. Around her huddled 49 other women, all workers from the same military production facility. Some were barely 16. Others were mothers in their 30s who had left children behind to serve the Empire's desperate final push. They had been hiding in the factory basement for 3 days since surrender, surviving on rainwater and moldy rice balls. Their supervisors had fled the moment they heard American troops were entering the city. The women stayed behind, paralyzed by the propaganda that had been drilled into them for years. Capture meant unspeakable things: torture, violation, public execution. Death was preferable. When the American patrol finally discovered them, Yumi had a shard of broken glass hidden in her sleeve. She had made peace with what she would have to do. Several other women clutched similar weapons. They had rehearsed their deaths in whispered conversations, promising each other they would not hesitate when the moment came. The sound of boots echoing through the empty factory made them press closer together. Yumi's heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst. The basement door creaked open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Then came voices in English, incomprehensible and terrifying. When the soldiers appeared, Yumi squeezed her eyes shut and waited for the rifle fire. Instead, she heard something unexpected. A woman's voice speaking careful, accented Japanese. "You are safe now. The war is over. We are not going to hurt you." Yumi opened her eyes to see an American woman in uniform, a Japanese-American translator, standing between the armed soldiers and the cowering prisoners. The woman's face was calm, almost kind. She repeated the words slowly, as though speaking to frightened children. "You will be taken to a holding facility. You will be fed. You will be given medical care. No one will harm you." The women did not believe her. How could they? Everything they had been taught said this was impossible. Yet the soldiers made no aggressive moves. They simply stood there, waiting with strange patience, while the translator continued speaking in soothing tones. Eventually, exhaustion and hunger won over terror. One by one, the women emerged from the basement, blinking in the harsh daylight. They were loaded onto trucks, still certain that execution awaited them at whatever destination lay ahead. Yumi kept the glass shard hidden. When death came, she would be ready. The first night. The compound they arrived at had once been a Japanese military administrative building. Now it flew American flags and bustled with organized activity. Yumi and the others were led into a large room where they expected processing for execution. Instead, they were handed bowls of hot soup and chunks of white bread. The women stared at the food in confusion. Was this a final meal before death? Several refused to eat, certain it was poisoned. But when the American guards ate from the same pots, ladling soup into their own bowls, and laughing with each other, suspicion gave way to desperate hunger. Yumi took her first bite, expecting to taste something bitter, some chemical that would end her life. Instead, she tasted beef and vegetables in a rich broth, unlike anything she had eaten in years. The bread was soft and slightly sweet. Her stomach, so long accustomed to near-starvation rations, cramped with the sudden richness. Several women wept as they ate. That night, they were shown to barracks with rows of clean beds, real mattresses, not the thin mats they had slept on in the factory dormitories, blankets that smelled of soap, pillows that felt impossibly soft, electric lights that glowed steadily from the ceiling. Yumi lay awake for hours, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This comfort had to be temporary, a cruel prelude to whatever horrors awaited them. Around her, other women whispered in the darkness, sharing the same fears. Tomorrow, they told each other. Tomorrow the truth would reveal itself. But tomorrow came, and with it, something none of them could have predicted. The shocking announcement the next morning, after another impossibly generous breakfast of eggs and rice, the prisoners were assembled in the compound's central courtyard. An American officer stood before them with the Japanese-American translator at his side. The women braced themselves. This was it, the moment of truth. The officer spoke in English, and the translator conveyed his words in Japanese. You are prisoners of war, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. You will be housed, fed, and given medical care. You will not be forced to work, though voluntary work assignments are available, and ... The translator paused, as though she herself could not quite believe what came next. You will be allowed to move freely within the compound. There will be guards at the perimeter for security, but you will not be watched or followed inside the fence. You may walk where you wish, gather in groups, and organize your own daily activities as you see fit. Stunned silence greeted this announcement. The women looked at each other, searching for understanding in faces as confused as their own. Free movement. No guards watching them constantly. It had to be a trick, a test of some kind. One of the older women, a former factory supervisor named Haruko, raised her hand hesitantly. The translator nodded for her to speak. What happens if we try to escape? Haruko asked, her voice shaking. The translator consulted with the officer, then responded. The perimeter is guarded. Escape attempts would be stopped, but within the compound, you are trusted to conduct yourselves responsibly. We do not believe in treating prisoners like caged animals. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. In Japanese military facilities, prisoners were kept under constant surveillance, often bound, always watched. The idea of trust between captor and captive violated everything they understood about the nature of war and power. You may test this if you wish, the translator added. Walk around. See for yourselves the test. For the first hour after the announcement, not a single woman moved. They remained clustered together near the barracks, watching the American guards at the compound's edge with deep suspicion. Those guards stood at their posts, relaxed, occasionally chatting with each other. They did not patrol the interior. They did not watch the women with hostile eyes. Yumi could not accept it. There had to be hidden watchers, surveillance from windows, some system of control they could not see. She whispered this to the others, and many nodded in agreement. Finally, a young woman named Tomoko, barely 17, and always the most daring among them, stood up. I'm going to walk to the other side of the compound, she announced. If they shoot me, at least we'll know the truth. Before anyone could stop her, Tomoko began walking. Her steps were hesitant at first, then grew bolder. She walked across the open courtyard toward the far barracks building, a journey of perhaps 200 meters. Every woman watched with held breath, expecting at any moment to hear a shout or worse. Nothing happened. Tomoko reached the far building, touched its wall as though claiming a victory, then walked back. Her face was pale but triumphant. No one stopped me. No one followed me. There are no guards except at the fence. The revelation spread through the group like electricity. One by one, more women stood and began to walk, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. They explored the compound's buildings, discovered a small library with Japanese books, found a courtyard with benches where they could sit in the sun. Everywhere they went, they moved freely, unwatched. Yumi found herself walking toward the mess hall, her heart pounding. She expected at any moment to be ordered back, to be punished for this presumption. But the American soldiers she passed simply nodded or smiled. One even held a door open for her, a gesture of courtesy so unexpected it nearly made her stumble. By evening, the transformation was visible. Women who had spent the previous night huddled in terror now walked the compound in small groups, talking quietly, their faces showing the first cracks in their certainty that death was imminent. The deeper shock. In the following days, the freedom of movement revealed itself to be no trick. The women could wake when they wished, within reason. They could choose where to sit during meals. They could gather in the library or the courtyard or their barracks without permission or supervision. The only rules were simple: stay within the compound, respect the shared spaces, and attend the daily roll call. For Yumi, this freedom was more disturbing than captivity would have been. She had been raised in a society where every action was prescribed, every movement monitored, every choice made by someone in authority. In the factory, she had needed permission to use the bathroom. In school, she had walked in formation. In her family home, her father had dictated her daily schedule. Now, in an enemy prison camp, she had more autonomy than she had ever known in her own country. The psychological impact was profound. One evening, sitting in the courtyard with a group of other women, Yumi voiced the thought that had been gnawing at her. Why do they trust us? We are their enemies. We worked in factories that built weapons to kill them. Why give us this freedom? An older woman named Sachiko, who had been a school teacher before the war, answered slowly, perhaps because they do not see us as enemies anymore. The war is over. To them, we are simply people who need to be housed until we can go home. But we were taught that prisoners are always treated as animals, another woman protested. That captors always inflict suffering, that this is the natural order of power. Then perhaps, Sachiko said quietly, we were taught lies. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread through every heart present. If this was a lie, what else had been false? The question was too large, too terrifying to fully confront. Not yet. The library discovery. Yumi began spending hours in the small library the Americans had set up. It contained books in Japanese, some clearly brought from the United States, others scavenged from local sources. There were novels, poetry collections, and history books. But what fascinated and disturbed Yumi most were the American books that had been translated. She found herself reading about American history, about their Revolution and Civil War, about their Constitution and Bill of Rights. The concepts were alien and compelling. Government by consent of the governed, freedom of speech, the right to question authority. One book explained the American prison system and the concept of rehabilitation over pure punishment. Another discussed the philosophy behind the Geneva Conventions and the humane treatment of prisoners of war. Yumi read these passages multiple times, trying to reconcile them with everything she had been taught about American barbarity. The Japanese-American translator, whose name was Amy, sometimes visited the library. She had been born in California, she explained, and had volunteered to serve as a translator after Pearl Harbor to prove her loyalty to America. Her family had been sent to internment camps, yet she spoke of her country with genuine affection. "Why did they imprison your own people?" Yumi asked one day, emboldened by the freedom of conversation that seemed encouraged rather than punished. Amy's face clouded. Fear, prejudice. It was wrong, and many Americans said so even while it was happening. That's one difference I've noticed. In America, when the government does something wrong, people are allowed to say so. Newspapers write about it. Citizens protest. The government doesn't always listen, but the conversation happens. In Japan, Yumi said slowly, such conversation would be treason. I know, Amy replied. I've lived in both worlds. They're very different. The singing incident, the moment that crystallized everything, came 3 weeks into their captivity. It started spontaneously one evening when a woman named Keiko began humming an old folk song from her childhood. Others joined in, their voices tentative at first, then growing stronger. Soon, a dozen women were singing together in the courtyard, a traditional song about cherry blossoms and the changing seasons. Yumi watched from the barracks window, not yet brave enough to join, but moved by the sound. It had been so long since anyone had sung. Music had felt too frivolous, too joyful for the grinding desperation of the war years. An American guard approached the group, and the singing immediately stopped. The women froze, realizing too late that they had broken some unspoken rule. Punishment was surely coming now. They braced themselves. The guard spoke, and Amy translated. That was beautiful. Would you teach me the words? The shock of this request was total. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Keiko, who had started the singing, began again, slowly enunciating, clearly. The guard listened, attempting to mimic the Japanese words with comical ineptitude. The women began to giggle despite themselves. More guards appeared, drawn by the sound. Instead of ordering silence, they sat on the ground and listened. Some smiled. One tapped his foot to the rhythm. When the song ended, they applauded. Do you know any American songs? One guard asked through Amy. What followed was an impromptu exchange of music that lasted for hours. The Americans taught the women simple songs. You Are My Sunshine, Home on the Range, fragments of jazz and swing. The Japanese women shared folk songs, work songs, lullabies their mothers had sung. The language barrier dissolved in melody and rhythm. Yumi found herself sitting in the circle, singing for the first time in years, her voice joining with those of former enemies in something that felt impossibly like joy. Tears streamed down her face, but she could not have said whether they were tears of happiness or grief for the years of isolation and fear that had been built on lies. The breaking point that night, back in the barracks, the woman named Haruko, who had asked about escape, spoke into the darkness. I cannot bear this anymore. The kindness is worse than cruelty would have been. I can accept being hated. I cannot accept being treated as though I matter. Her voice broke, and others murmured agreement. The cognitive dissonance had become unbearable. Everything they had suffered, everything they had sacrificed, had been predicated on the belief that they were fighting demons, that capture meant a fate worse than death, that the emperor's way was the only path to honor. But these demons had given them freedom of movement, had sat with them and shared songs, had treated them not as animals or even as enemies, but as human beings deserving of dignity. "We were lied to," someone whispered. The words, once spoken, could not be taken back. In the darkness, women began to weep, not quietly, but with great, heaving sobs that spoke of years of repression and the sudden, overwhelming collapse of everything they had believed. Yumi wept with them, as she thought of the glass shard she had carried, ready to end her life rather than face capture. She thought of the propaganda films she had watched, the speeches she had memorized, the absolute certainty with which she had been taught that Americans were subhuman monsters. She thought of the guard who had asked to learn their song, the casual way Americans had offered them freedom of movement, the library full of books encouraging them to think and question, the medical care given without hesitation, the food shared without measure. If they lied about this, Yumi said aloud, what else was a lie? What else did we believe that was false? No one answered, because there was no answer. The foundation of their worldview had cracked, and through that crack they were glimpsing a reality they had no framework to understand. The transformation in the months that followed, the transformation continued. The women organized their own daily routines, formed study groups to learn English, and created a small garden in an unused corner of the compound. The Americans provided seeds and tools without being asked. Some women volunteered for work assignments, helping in the kitchens or the laundry. They were paid in small amounts, enough to buy extra supplies from the camp store. The concept of being paid for work as a prisoner was another impossibility made real. Yumi found herself volunteering to help Amy with translation work. She wanted to understand these people who had appended everything she thought she knew. In the process, she learned about American families, their hopes and fears, their own struggles during the war.